The Dialed In Angling Podcast, presented by Onyx Fish, Runnings, Arneson's Rocky Point Resort, Visit Watertown, South Dakota, Mantrap Lake Lodge, and Visit Cook County. Well, welcome back to the podcast. Here we are, summer 2.0. Last week we were talking about daytime temps, in the 50s, 60s at the most. We had even had some frost or close to a frost. There was frost advisories in northern Minnesota. The leaves are changing, and yet this week it's almost 90 degrees in the Twin Cities, all across Minnesota. It's been great weather. That's September in a nutshell. In Minnesota, you just never know what September is going to bring. It could be super rainy, could be beautiful. It seems like the last few years, September has been extremely nice, and this year right along the same lines. Even though it cooled down a little bit in the beginning of the month, I really enjoyed that in the sense where it dropped the surface temperatures. It started getting us into that fall mode. The leaves are changing. Cannot complain about the cool down. It's been nice to enjoy and be outside and enjoy this weather. It looks like the rest of the month's going to be in the 70s, so I'll take it. Summer 2.0 is the theme. But as we're talking summer 2.0, we are getting towards some fall patterns. Fall goes so fast. This week alone, I've tried to pack it all in. It seems like fall is like that, where you try to pack it all in, hunting, fishing, everything you can do. I mean, this week alone, if you listen to the podcast last week, I was up on the Gunflint Trail. It was amazing. It was like traveling into the future as you got up the trail. The leaves were changing. There was already some leaves coming off the trees. That's what we're experiencing now this week in my region. Everything looks beautiful. The leaves are gorgeous. I've been out checking deer stands, checking trails. I got trail cameras out. I start to get deer on my mind this time of year. Also saw some grouse along the side of the road. I saw them on my way up the Gunflint last week, so that's on my mind as well. In addition to that, as far as fishing this week, I did have a day off where I went and fished Lake Superior again. My love for lake trout continues to grow. My son and I zipped up to Lake Superior, spent the better part of a day with a buddy of mine and jigging lake trout. And yes, with the surface temperatures dropping on all the small lakes, Lake Superior is no different. Those fish started shifting a little bit shallower than when I fished them in August. And, we caught some fish on our own, mainly vertical jigging. We sort of just looked around until we found fish. A lot of the fish were relating to the humps, to the ledges, and did quite well. We caught quite a few lake trout, for just going out for a few hours and kind of killing a day, sort of hunting and pecking and looking for fish. We did pretty well. We found some good schools of fish that were relatively shallow, I would say, for this time of year, 60 to 80 feet off the edges of these humps. It was pretty calm out there. It's been very windy most days, but we found a calm day, and I had the day off, and Robbie and I took advantage of it. We went out there. It was really, really fun to get out there and experience that while the surface temperatures are still warm. And there's still time. If you want to experience lake trout fishing in Minnesota, you've got to do it before the end of the month. The lake trout season in Minnesota closes as you get towards the end of September. So keep that in mind if you have some plans of getting up the North Shore to do a little lake trout fishing. You've got to get that done because lake trout season closes in Minnesota at the end of September. Now you can fish in Michigan. I know that there's other areas you can fish, like Isle Royale. A lot of people think of that as Minnesota. That's actually Michigan waters. So, keep that in mind. If you're going to Lake Superior, especially fishing the Minnesota side, it's going to close at the end of the month here. But it was fun to get out probably at my last time lake trout fishing for the year on Lake Superior. So that was fun to get out with my boat and just sort of look for fish and do some exploring. Anytime I'm on Lake Superior or any big body water like that, it's fun to explore. And, when I was driving up the North Shore, I was looking at all these different access points all the way to Grand Marais and north, where I want to experience some more lake trout fishing next year. Already starting to think about plans for next year of fishing up there, just because it is so fun, and I want to experience the South Shore as well. I want to do some exploring, maybe even this winter. I mean, if you pay attention to any of the weather reports or the almanac or the forecasters for winter anyway, it looks like we're in store for a colder than normal winter is what they're talking. We don't know until we get there. Obviously, with the cool down in early in September, I was thinking, oh man, we're going to have an early fall, but weather has a way of correcting itself. But if we do get a colder than normal winter, I would love to experience some Lake Superior ice fishing, maybe even for dialed in angling. We talked about it last year. It's been a few years since the lake froze over, but some of those years where the entire lake freezes over, that's when I really want to experience it. I'm not into, venturing out a couple 100 yards off a shore when it's wide open. I don't know. It just doesn't interest me. I have a lot of friends that do that in the winter. For me, I need a little bit more of a comfort zone as far as ice. I've seen videos where people are ice fishing on Lake Superior and the ice is moving up and down because the waves are underneath the ice. That it doesn't really intrigue me. I would rather be out where it's, somewhat safe, where I'm feeling safe and I can go have a good time and really just focus on fishing, not what the ice is doing or if the ice is going to shift or if the wind shifts, the ice is going to be gone. I'm not really into that. But if we do get good ice this year and if all predictions are right and we get a colder than normal winter, this would be a great year to get out to Lake Superior and experience some, not only lake trout fishing, but just coho fishing and Lake Superior ice fishing in general. I think it'd be really fun. The last window that we had has been over a decade ago. I sort of missed that. I wanted to do it so bad, but I was really busy guiding and doing other things. This time around, I won't miss it. I have some buddies that are really interested in it. My son is, obviously with all the lake trout fishing we've been doing. And then, of course, with dialed in angling, I want to get out there and experience that. So hopefully that comes to fruition. We'll see what Mother Nature brings. Let's get into the meat of the podcast. And as we get towards the end of September, fall is that time period where it goes so fast. You're trying to get everything done. If you're a hunter, if you've got, deer camp on the brain, you've got to deal with all of that stuff, checking your deer stands. Obviously a lot of people are thinking bow hunting right now. Even as of last weekend, because of the grouse opener, I did see a few grouse hunters out there. So people are trying to get a lot done this time of year and it goes way too fast. But there are some things and some species you can chase this time of year as we get to the meat and potatoes of fall. I would consider like prime fall, where it's like peak fishing, peak everything, to be that end of September, early October timeframe. And we're almost there. It's the 20th of September right now. We're in that 19th, 20th timeframe. Next week, we'll start to get into that peak period. I've been all over the place. In addition to being up on Lake Superior, I've been on Leech Lake. I was on Winnie. I've been back on Mille Lacs over the last week and a half, and you're starting to see the shift of fish. Obviously, that cool down that we had was a big shot in the arm for moving some fish shallow. Not all the fish, but a lot of walleyes have been moving shallow, a lot of jumbo perch. And so I want to get into some conversations talking about jumbo perch in particular, and then also how the walleyes are setting up, even though it's starting to warm up, because a lot of those fish shifted in doesn't necessarily mean they moved back out. You just have to play the wind on some of these days and pick your days, because honestly, some of those days where it got really warm, especially last week where it was, late in the week where it was close to 90 up here, it didn't quite get that warm, but even in the upper 80s, that morning bite was key. Getting out there and fishing those fish in the morning, and then also towards evening as far as chasing walleyes. And during the day, we got a few walleyes, but chasing jumbo perch is starting to come online. So I want to get into that in a bit. We're going to take a quick break, but when I come back, let's do a deep dive into fall perch fishing and of course where the walleyes are setting up. But perch fishing in particular is one of my favorite times a year to target jumbo perch away from ice fishing. So stay tuned. We got more dialed in angling coming your way. onX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you are after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. onX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download onX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water.
Visit Cook County, Minnesota, a year-round fishing destination like no other. Spring brings steelhead and smelt runs along the Lake Superior shoreline. In summer, cast for walleye, lake trout, and northern pike in the region's inland lakes and rivers. As the leaves change, so does the fishing, with fall offering some of the best lake trout action around. When winter settles in, grab your gear and head out for ice fishing in a true northern wilderness setting. Whether you're an experienced angler or just discovering the joy of casting a line, Cook County has a spot and a season for you. Learn more and start planning your fishing trip at visitcookcounty.com.
Arneson's Rocky Point Resort in northern Minnesota offers a little something for everyone. Nestled on Lake of the Woods South Shore, it provides easy access to 14 remarkable reefs. Serious anglers know that Arneson's offers some of the best fishing, charter fishing, and small boat fishing options, all supported by the largest protected marina on the lake's South Shore. Accommodation selections range from 1 to 5 bedrooms. Equipped with all the modern conveniences, guests can enjoy a delightful dining experience and stunning lake views at the Rock Harbor Lodge, an on-site, full-service bar and restaurant. The two beaches provide hours of fun for the whole family. Whether you're seeking an idyllic fishing spot or a relaxing vacation, Arneson's Rocky Point has everything you need. Check them out at arnesonsresort.com. Okay, let's do a deep dive into jumbo perch, in particular fall patterns. This by far, as far as the open water season is concerned, is my favorite time to chase jumbo perch. And for good reason. I was just on Leech the other day, and the perch are in when you start seeing literally hundreds of boats fishing around the bulrushes in Walker Bay. You see them in the shallows along the Rice. You see people up in Steamboat Bay. You see them up in Portage Bay. All these areas that hold jumbo perch this time of year, they start to slide in September. And, it's sort of a bite window. It seems like the fall perch bite starts a little bit earlier than let's say the walleye bite, for example. Those perch start to slide in when surface temps get into the 60s. And so you start to see big numbers of jumbo perch sort of congregate around these areas where, as most times of the year, these fish get scattered, not just on Leech, but on Winnie, Mille Lacs, all these bodies of water. You see this big shift, some fish are out deep, some are in the weeds, they're sort of scattered, but this time of year, they start to get really congregated into some of these areas, and they're feeding on a few different things. And so keying in on what they're feeding on is always key, right? Like Leech, for example, you've got a ton of rusty crayfish. So it seems like once you catch those fish, or if you're going to fillet a few, I always look at their stomachs to see what they're feeding on, because perch have this big, giant, vast diet of anything from crustaceans to young of the year perch. They feed on their own. They cannibalize. They feed on shiner minnows. They also feed on invertebrates in the water column. They feed on bugs. They'll eat they've got a big, wide variety of diet in their diet. And it seems like if you can really pick what they're feeding on that particular time frame, you're going to catch a lot more fish. I know, for example, on Leech, on Cass, because of the rusty crayfish, I use a lot of baits on the bottom, whether it's, jigging a minnow, but using sort of that crayfish color, or tube jigs, micro tubes. That's a secret of mine, has been for years, but using kind of those reddish colored tube baits, those work very, very well. I've even had it too, like in super clear water where you use a tube, but then you tip it with either a minnow or just the minnow head. And it sort of looks like that crayfish. I've had tremendous success with micro tubes and small jigs, like a 16th ounce jig, eighth at the very most, and just sort of beating the bottom of that and just kind of working it through some of that sandgrass. A lot of the areas where you can find these fish, a lot of times I'll just drift or cast around and run my trolling motor at a fairly high rate until you start catching perch of good size. Because here's the deal. You go to Mille Lacs, Winnie, Leech, Cass, any of these lakes, you're going to find perch of all sorts of different sizes, right? Starting with the real small young of the year. Typically, they're not biting. They're too small to grab anything you're using. However, you get a lot of those year 2 perch, which are the 4-5 inch perch, 3-4-5 inch perch. And then you get the year 3 perch, which are the 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 inchers, depending on the lake you're on. And then, of course, you get what I would consider jumbos, where you start to get 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe even 14 inch, depending on what size of year class are in those lakes. So some of those fish are 4, 5, even 6-year-old fish. They all start to come into the shallows. Now, it seems like most cases, if you're catching the really, really small perch, you're not in the right area. You need to get into, and sometimes it doesn't mean you have to go all the way across the lake. It just means you have to slide a little bit further down the line or get into an area where you're seeing a little bit bigger fish. We see that a lot in the winter too. We'll be drilling holes, and talk to Pete if you ever guide with me, Pete, who runs with me in the winter. I'll ask them like, hey, find them? Yep, these are the right ones. We're starting to find a lot of marginal ones. And so we call them margies. When you start to get into the margies, that means you're starting to get into those 5, 6, 7, 8 inch perch. Okay, so they're getting closer. But typically when you start finding those 6, 7, 8 inch perch, you're getting closer to the right ones. And if you start finding those, typically the jumbos are near, right? They're closer to that area. So if you're running your trolling motor, if you're back trolling, if you're drifting, once you start finding those margies or marginal perch, that's when you need to spot lock or slow down and start fishing those areas to see if you can find the jumbos. And then, of course, once you hook a jumbo, I instantly hit spot lock, and then I'm working those areas to see if I can catch more of those jumbos, because they run together. If you catch a 12-inch perch, you're in the right area. And they relate to different things. Like sometimes they're in cabbage, sometimes they're in the sandgrass. Sometimes, this time of year, they're right up along the bulrushes or the rice or whatever it may be. Mille Lacs may be a little bit different than Winnie, Leech, Cass, but not a whole lot different. I would say Mille Lacs in particular, a lot of the fish spend most of their summers out in really deep water, and then they come in shallow, whereas Leech, Winnie, Cass, and some of these other small lakes, the fish are sort of scattered. You have some fish that are like residents in the weeds throughout the year. And then you do have some of these schools that are roaming out in the basin, eating, all sorts of different bugs that hatch on those lakes as well, and then start to come in the shallows. So, they fish a little bit differently. I'm going to kind of break down each lake as a whole. I'm going to talk extended techniques that I like using. I've already touched on the jig minnow, tube jig. I'm also going to talk a little bit about paddle tails, because in addition to crayfish, they do feed heavily on young of the year perch, and then also shiner minnows that'll start to come in the shallows. And I like to use small plastics. Now, here's the deal with plastics. You may not get as many bites as you do if you're just using a minnow or a minnow head on there. And typically when I say minnows, I'm using fat heads, right? But when you're using a plastic and you're cracking a plastic, you tend to reduce the number of bites you're going to get on small fish and you're only going to be targeting these bigger jumbo perch. And so I like to use like a 1 or a 2-inch paddle tail, and then just same size jig head, either a 16th or an 1/8 ounce jig head. If you're looking for a little bit bigger perch where you're not going to catch as many small ones, it's hard to beat the Neon Moon Eye jig from VMC, and then tipping that with like a 2-inch, 2.5-inch, even a 3-inch Crush City paddle tail, and then just using any sort of perch pattern. They do like whites as well. Anything that looks like a shiner minnow will work, but I tend to use, some of the brighter colors for perch, a lot of the fire tiger looking colors, or, the yellows, that sort of thing, because they do they cannibalize a lot. I clean a lot of perch in the fall, and, when you open up those perch, it's amazing what they have in their stomach, from crayfish to yellow perch to, I've even caught jumbo perch on Mille Lacs back in the day where, a 14-inch perch had a young of the year walleye in its stomach. So think of that, a species that's being chased by a predator like a walleye its entire life. Now it's big enough to eat a walleye. I always tell people that, like, that's when you're starting to get very large perch, when they're eating walleyes. So, but they can eat a number of things. So using those bigger paddle tails and sort of cracking those paddle tails off the bottom, much like you would fish them for walleyes, where you throw them out there, let them hit the bottom, pop it, let it fall, pop it, let it fall. What's nice about fishing that is it remains pretty weedless. I mean, you can fish it through heavy cabbage, you can fish it through sandgrass. You don't have to worry about it getting plugged up with weeds. I guess the only time that it doesn't shine is if you sometimes this time of year, which this year's not the case, but sometimes a year you get a little bit of algae or slime on the bottom and it just doesn't work quite as well. But we're not seeing that this year. That was occurring earlier in the season. It seems like now we're not seeing as much of that slime on the bottom. Yes, there's some vegetation that's really starting to die off. Like I was on Mille Lacs this week, and it's amazing the amount of like eelgrass that's floating right now. All of that stuff starting to die off. As that stuff starts to die off, you'll start to see these fish slide in the shallows. So let's get away from plastics a little bit. And I want to talk about hard baits, because I use a lot of hard baits, particularly on Mille Lacs, for jumbo perch. And when I talk hard baits, I'm talking jigging wraps. I'm talking ripping wraps, a rattle style bait like that. Typically what you'd use in the winter, like a 4 or 5 size rattle wrap, even a slab wrap. And not to say you can't use it on Winnie and Leech and Cass and that sort of thing, or any small lake. But what happens with those hard baits on lakes like that I just mentioned, those lakes have a ton of sandgrass, right? And in the sandgrass, you start using a jig and wrap, rip and wrap, you're constantly going to be fouled. Not to say you can't catch fish with those baits, but because that bait's always fouled and you're always pulling vegetation off there, it's sort of counterproductive. You're better off using a plastic, a tube, a paddle tail, even just a straight minnow on just a regular lead head or tungsten jig on Winnie, Leech, Cass, or any small lakes. And when I lump all those together, a lot of those lakes fish very similar, right? You have shallow water fish that are relating to weeds all over the lake. You can find them in a lot of different spots on those lakes. Whereas Mille Lacs, it's a cleaner bottom most of the time. Not to say that the perch don't slide in the weeds in the shallows, let's say on the south end or the west side or even the north end up in the weeds, because they do. But you find a lot of these fish this time of year will start to move into these, I would say, sandy depressions in between the rock piles. It may be 15, 20 feet. It may be shallower than that. I can think of countless areas that if you look on your map, there's little depressions around these rock piles that these perch will start to load up. And so what I do is I start to drive around. Either I used to use side imaging, and I drive around to look for these fish, or even 2D sonar. Now, forward-facing sonar, you can find these big schools of fish along these, I would call them transitions, but more or less they're depressions, right? they don't have to be like a deep depression. They don't have to be a big depth change. They just have to be sand off the edges of these rock piles. So sometimes it's a foot or two difference versus the rock pile, or you might have a rock pile that comes up to 10 feet and then you have deep water around that area that's sort of sandy. Those are the areas in early September or mid-September where I start to look for some of these jumbo perch. And a jigging wrap, rip and wrap, slab wrap are my go-tos. Jigging wrap in particular, a number 5 jigging wrap, but even a number 7, don't overlook using a number 7. You're going to catch perch, you're going to catch walleyes. A lot of the walleyes right now are moving in, staging in those same areas. So I start to look for areas where you're starting to see big congregations of young of the year perch, because on Mille Lacs, they're carnivores. They're eating a lot of bugs and invertebrates as well, but they also are meat eaters, and you start to see young of the year perch slide in the shallows. So like Winnie and Cass and those lakes are feeding on crayfish. On Mille Lacs, they're feeding on jumbo perch. And so jigging wraps are probably my number one go-to. Number 4s, number 5s. You can use a variety of different colors, right? Yellow perch color, just sort of the simple yellow perch color. Fire tiger is a very good color, but you can use the crayfish colors as well, because they do feed on crayfish on Mille Lacs just like they do on the other lakes. It's just, you're seeing them feed more on young of the year perch than you are crayfish this time of year on Mille Lacs, if that makes sense. So don't be afraid to try some of the crayfish style colors, that red crayfish, dark brown crayfish, any of those colors work fantastic on Mille Lacs. But I sort of stay in that realm of crayfish and yellow perch style colors this time of year. As we get towards later fall, I'll go to some of the blue chromes, some of the shiner type of colors, tulibies, because perch will feed on anything, right? They feed on anything and everything they can. They feed and they move. That's what perch are good at. So if I were going to Mille Lacs this weekend, I want to catch a few walleyes. I want to mix in some jumbo perch. I know I've had a lot of customers call me and ask me, hey, are you on the perch? I'm starting to see a few show up. I've been waiting for this time of year ever since the ice melted, in April or whatever it was. Ever since I've been ice fishing on Mille Lacs. Last year, obviously with the popularity of jumbo perch returning to Mille Lacs and these big numbers of jumbos, all I've been thinking about is not catching them in the spring or summer, but waiting till fall when these fish start to show up where I can actually target them in shallow water and target them right alongside the walleyes. And so if you're coming to Mille Lacs this weekend, I would tie on a jigging wrap, number 5, number 7. I'd start looking at these depression areas around some of the rock piles. But also you might want to bring some fatheads and some leadhead jigs and start poking around the edges of these weeds. It could be weeds that are around some of the rock piles. It could be weeds that are in the south end bays, but looking for some of these areas where these jumbo perch are starting to show up. I've already seen a few show up here. It's a good sign. As these surface temperatures get to be near lower 60s, you're going to see big numbers of perch return from this vast basin that's Mille Lacs Lake into the shallows to start to feed and put the feed bag on. It makes for a really fun trip. So I'm really looking forward to fishing Mille Lacs over the next few weeks because, I want to catch these big jumbo perch, alongside these walleyes. I spent most of my career aside from the last, I would say, decade, prior to the last decade, I should say, in the fall, man, I had trips where that's all I'd target. I didn't even target walleyes in September. It was always jumbo perch. And I had customers year after year after year that's all they wanted to fish. And same with Winnie, same with Leech. It seems like all of these lakes, the perch fishing is really good right now, but it's good in basically because we have some good year classes coming up. Winnie, Leech, Cass, Mille Lacs, the perch fishing's really, really good right now, and it's only going to get better as we get towards the end of the month. So if you're looking to take kids fishing, if you're going up to northern Minnesota somewhere and you're going to put up deer stands or you're going to bow hunt in the morning, this is a good time of year. You can sneak out for a few hours, catch some jumbo perch, have a great time doing it, maybe even a few walleyes, vertical jigging or casting jigs, casting plastics, casting jigging wraps, and catching fish, having success doing it. And then you can get back to your deer camp or do some grouse hunting or do some bow hunting in the evening. You can do sort of a cast and blast and fit it all in and have a very successful trip. Or if you just want to fit in some really fun, quality fall fishing, especially with kids, perch is the number one species to go after this time of year. It's really, really hard to beat. I can think of when I was a kid going out with my dad in the fall. We loved perch fishing, going up to Lake Winnebagosh. We'd fish the shallows. I remember fishing 6-7 feet of water, vertical jigging or snap jigging with my dad and catching a ton of jumbo perch, catching walleyes mixed in. At the end of the day, we had an absolute live well full. We had a killer fish fry afterwards. It's hard to beat, man. It really is. Even at my age right now, when you get into those jumbos, it is really, truly a fun fall experience. And it's one of the best bites in the fall, bar none. So we're going to take another quick break here, our final break. When I get back into it, I want to talk some walleye techniques. I also want to talk some smallmouth bass fishing. Those are starting to fire as well. Stay tuned. Summer 2.0. We're going to be breaking down some walleye techniques, smallmouth bass when we return.
Man Trap Lodge, a Park Rapids resort on beautiful Big Man Trap Lake. Features 16 decked-out private cabins with air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and a rare Northwood swimming pool. Cabins are available with 1 to 5 bedroom units to select from. Whether you're looking for a fishing trip, a family vacation, or a family reunion, Man Trap Lodge is the Park Rapids resort for you. Rent one of our fishing boats for a great day of fishing or a pontoon to cruise around the lake and relax. Man Trap Lodge is a truly magical Minnesota vacation spot that's fun for the whole family. Don't miss your chance to book your late summer or fall trip at Man Trap Lodge for some fantastic fishing. Check us out at mantraplodge.com.
Runnings Home, Farm, and Outdoor Stores are celebrating 78 years, serving 90 local communities across the Upper Midwest, the Northeast, and America's Heartland. Runnings has everything you and your family need for your home, on the farm, and in the outdoors. Lawn and garden, hardware, farm and ranch supplies, sporting goods, housewares, snacks, and everything for your pets. Go to runnings.com to find one of the 90 locations near you or shop online anytime at runnings.com. Runnings, your home, farm, and outdoor store.
Watertown, South Dakota is your hub for year-round fishing in the heart of the Glacial Lakes region. With Lakes Kempeska and Pelican right in town and dozens more just a short drive away, you'll find non-stop action for walleye, perch, and pike, just to name a few. When you're off the water, explore the Terry Redlin Art Center, Bramble Park Zoo, and many other great museums. Plus, award-winning pizza and family-friendly fun around every corner. Easy to reach, hard to leave. Plan your next cast at visitwatertownsd.com. So much Watertown, so little time.
Okay, let's get into some walleye fishing for right now, in the now. If you're going walleye fishing, you're pumped for fall fishing, but particularly walleyes, man, I'm with you. I love walleye fishing this time of year. It's starting to heat up. It's sort of that anticipation where, let me break down the calendar year, right? My season goes as follows. Let's start with the spring. Once the ice is gone, I can't wait to get in the boat, get out to Green Bay. Those of you that know me love going up to Rainy River. If you listen to the podcast, if you're fans of the show, you know that I love getting up, doing some spring fishing, getting out to South Dakota, North Dakota, anything I can do to get on the water because Minnesota is not open until mid-May. But once the opener hits, I'm walleye. For the most part, I do chase some smallmouth bass, but I'm so focused on walleyes in the spring. I love jig fishing. Sort of that spring jig bite is one of my favorites, right? I can't get enough of it. snapping a jig, whether it's a jig and a minnow, jig and a plastic, throwing hair jigs, moon eye jigs, VMC moon eye jigs, my go-to a lot of times. If you've ever jumped in the boat with me guiding, you know that I love jig fishing. As we get into summer, though, it starts to go towards bobber fishing, which I don't mind. I love seeing a cork go down, love bobber fishing. And then, of course, it's rigging and jigging and trolling and everything that makes up sort of summer patterns, jig wrapping. Love all that stuff. I like experimenting with different plastics, different techniques, doing a lot of open water fishing as of late, swimming crawlers, swimming plastics, targeting fish that are suspended over a basin, learning a lot with forward-facing sonar. We've talked about all of that on the podcast if you're a fan of the podcast. But now as we get towards now, which I would consider the beginning of this peak fall period where these walleyes are starting to move back into the shallows. They're starting to put the feed bag on. The temps that we had really kind of propelled this bite as we get into this week. Now, I would say that warm up sort of, I wouldn't say killed the bite, but it slowed it down a little bit. Those afternoon, daytime temperatures definitely changed the bite from what it was a week ago, but you can still experience these bites as we get towards the weekend. These nighttime lows are really keeping surface temperatures in check. Even though it's been really warm during the day for a few days, and it looks like the extended forecast is going to be in the 70s, you're not going to see surface temperatures climb any. You might see afternoon surface temperatures up there a little bit, but they're knocked right back down towards evening because there's just not enough daylight. And of course, now that we have, the sun going down at 7:30, it doesn't really come up until after 6:30, almost 7. So we've got almost 12 hours of darkness. With that being said, these nighttime lows are still cool. So it's going to knock down those surface temperatures and keep those surface temperatures down as we move towards the end of the month. And so we're starting to see those fall patterns really set up. And when they set up, we get back to that great jigging bite that I referred to and I love. Like in the spring, jigs and minnows, jigs and plastics, also hair jigs. Right now, if you want to experiment with jigs and plastics and hair jigs, in particular on Mille Lacs or Winnebagosh, like if you're hitting those two lakes in particular, this is the time to do it. My go-to this year, and it's already been unveiled, but I'm going to talk about it probably for the first time on the podcast, and that's the Rapala Crush City, the jerk. Okay, it's a jerk style shad. It looks like a fluke. It's a minnow tail. It comes in a 3.75 inch size. It's perfect for tipping on jig heads like a moon eye jig, tipping it on any sort of lead head or tungsten jig. What I like about these jerk shads is they're, with the surface temperatures being in the mid 60s and up there a little bit, the fish don't quite want the paddle tails yet. And so they gravitate towards these jerk shads. And what you do is, just like you're fishing a paddle tail, you're going to throw that jig out there, let it sink to the bottom, and then snap it straight up in the air, letting it free fall. And those fish are either going to hit it on the fall or they're going to pick it up off the bottom. Now, I've been fishing the jerks all summer long. I was lucky enough to get a whole bunch of samples from my buddy Dan Quinn over at Rapala. And Dan hooked me up with these because he knows that I love fishing minnow style or fluke style baits on jig heads. And I've been asking for this bait in the Crush City lineup for a while. Now it's here. If you can get your hands on some of these jerks for next spring, as we get towards next summer, you're going to be a better angler as a result. You're going to catch more walleyes as a result. These baits work. I mean, if you like the Crush City Mayor, which is the paddle tail, you're going to love these jerks because they're a 1-2 punch. If they don't hit the paddle tail, they'll hit the jerk. So typically when the water's a lot cooler in the spring, like right away when you start out on opener, I use a lot of paddle tails. But then as soon as they start laying off the paddle tails, then I go to the jerks. Okay, that's the minnow profile. I'll instantly go to the jerks. Same thing can be said in the fall. I start fishing the jerks and these minnow style baits. And then as soon as that water starts to get really cool, I switch over to the paddle tails and then even the live bait. But I haven't fished any minnows on jig heads yet. That minnow bite's starting a little bit, but these jerks are really shining. I am cracking them on these plastics. What I love about the Crush City plastics is, just simply that super TPE technology, which is the plastic itself. It stays on the hook. It's got that elasticity to it. And so you could fish one bait for, literally a week. I've had the same bait on my jig head for, I would say, well over a week now. And I'm crushing the walleyes on Mille Lacs. We're seeing really good numbers of fish start to slide in the rocks. They're starting to move in the shallows. I wouldn't say that they're all over the lake, but there are pockets of fish all over Mille Lacs right now that are starting to move shallow, and they're feeding on these plastics like you can't believe. My kind of 1-2 punch right now, just because we are sort of in that time, that in-between time period, is I have a lot of customers in the boat every day, so I get to experiment. I'll do a jig and a crawler, a jig and a leech if you can find some leeches. It's been really hard to find good leeches, but a bobber setup. And then also I'm fishing the jigs and plastics. So I'll have one customer throw out a bobber on a pot of fish. I'm using my forward-facing sonar, and then I'll just be fan casting on the other side with a jig and a plastic, and we'll see what's working better. Sort of compare notes. And there's times where some of the fish are feeding on the bobbers. There's other times that jig bite is getting kicking into high gear, because I've had some days where we literally put the bobbers away and just were snapping plastics and had tremendous success. And that excites me, because that means fall fishing is here. When they are hitting those plastics like that and snap jigging, and they're really keying in on it, where you can feel your braid basically on a slack line, you can see that braid jump, that bite's on. Another bait that is a notable bait that is sort of along this same time, or I guess sort of in the same realm as jerk shads and snap jigging, is don't overlook hair jigs. Using the VMC bucktails, using the VMC moontail jig, they are killer hair jigs this time of year. And you don't have to tip them with plastic. Same thing, that really snapping motion. Hair jigs work great, not just on Mille Lacs. They work excellent on Lake Winnebagoche. They work on Leech. They work all over the Midwest, where you have like weed line walleyes, and these walleyes that are coming off these weed lines. You can fish a hair jig pretty clean, just like you can fish a plastic. So if you really want to get into snap jigging hair jigs, if you really want to get into snap jigging plastics, and you're looking for a new plastic to add to your arsenal, look for these Crush City jerks. And then, of course, if you haven't fished the Crush City Mayors, there's all sorts of different sizes now. You can get that 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4-inch. There's a variety of sizes, and so you can sort of match the hatchet. If my recommendation for you, especially with paddle tails, if you have a ton of young of the year perch in the lake, like you're seeing perch all over the place that are really small, like that 1 to 2 inch size, downsize your paddle tail. However, if it wasn't a good perch hatch that year and you're seeing a lot of perch that are in that 3, 4, 5 inch range, simply match the size of your paddle tail to what you're seeing as far as perch. And it's easy. When you launch your boat, look around the harbor. If you're coming through the shallows, look at the shallows, see if you can identify perch species. On all these lakes that I'm referring to, the water's super clear, so you can see if it's a young of the year perch hatch. Also, when you're out there with forward-facing sonar and you're seeing these big schools of bait fish, at what depth are they relating to? If you can find them at a specific depth, like the other day when I was on Leech, everything I was finding was in that, let's say, 10 to 12 foot range. And when I hit that 10 to 12 foot range, 11 to 12 in particular, I found a ton of bait. And as soon as I found a ton of bait, I found a ton of walleyes. Same can be said for Mille Lacs. Same can be said for Winnie. If you're finding them at a specific depth, that's where you're going to want to target those fish, because if the bait's there, the fish are going to be there. You see that a lot this time of year, and it may change from day to day. If you have a really cool evening, that bait might slide in or out based on surface temperatures, right? If it gets really warm in the afternoon, the bait might slide out a little bit. You'll also see the bait sometimes rise up to the surface. Like if it's dead flat calm and it's been cool and you get a warm afternoon, you'll start seeing some of this bait rise up. And so keeping a note of that. If you're using forward-facing sonar, don't be afraid to target these fish anywhere in the water column, but snap jigging plastics. If you don't have the greatest of electronics, it's a great way to power fish all of these areas and be very successful at catching these fish. So take advantage of this summer 2.0. It's not going to last long, although it looks like next week is going to be decent temperatures as well. As we get towards the end of October, these bites are just going to continue to heat up. I get excited talking about fishing this time of year. I'm excited to get up in the morning and get my cup of coffee in and get out to the lake. I've been lucky enough over the last week, and looks like next week as well, to be able to fish multiple different lakes and experience different bites. I'm going to be chasing perch. I'm going to be chasing walleyes. It's only going to get better as we get towards October here. And if we can keep these temperatures kind of in that upper 60s, lower 70s, nighttime lows in the 50s, the surface temperature is going to be very stable over the next few weeks. And that's going to trigger these bites to really kick into high gear. Before I end the podcast, I do want to talk a little bit about smallmouth bass fishing, because the smallmouth are starting to really group up. And when you see bass, and smallmouth bass in particular, start to get really, really grouped up, you know that the fall bite is near. And I started seeing it last week, where let's go back 2 weeks ago. I've done smallmouth trips, every week here. And 2 weeks ago, it seemed like the smallmouth were all over the place. You had some that were deep, some that were shallow, some that were up near the surface, some that were low. They were kind of all over, and I couldn't really get a firm pattern down. Now, as you fast forward to this week, I'm seeing big groups of fish loading up on the edges of these spots. They're starting to move to some of these areas. They're still a little bit shallow. They're not quite out to these wintering areas, but even these afternoons where it's been warming up in the afternoon, and I was talking about that bait fish rising, the jerkbait bite's starting to really kick into high gear. So if you like jerkbait fishing like me, I love throwing hard baits. Whether it's the Rapala, the Maverick 110s are great jerk baits to experiment with. They were new a couple of years ago. Of course, X-Raps. Always been a fan of the X-Rap since it came out. I love fishing X-Raps. The Rapala Shadow Rap. Those are three. You can fish the shallow running Shadow Raps or the deep Shadow Raps, depending on depth of the fish. But the jerkbait season is upon us. So if you want to catch some fish on jerkbaits, now is the time to do it. Also, swim baits are starting to really come online. Everything that you love about fall fishing smallmouth is starting to really kick into high gear. So you can have great days on Mille Lacs. Leech can be said the same. There's a lot of other lakes that hold smallmouth bass where you can do a 1-2 punch. If perch doesn't interest you, but you want to do a good multi-species trip right now on Mille Lacs, you can go catch walleyes, you can catch smallmouth bass and have a fun time doing it. You want to snap jig plastics, you're going to catch both species. You're going to catch more walleyes than smallmouth if you're snap jigging, but you're going to catch both. Even throwing a Ned rig out. Last week, I was Ned rigging a little bit. We were catching walleyes right alongside of the smallmouth bass. And so makes for a truly fun trip, just a multi-species trip. And I should say, I have been starting to see a few pike show up as well. These pike will slide in the shallows right along with these other species of fish. So here we are. Fall is here. I know I've been talking about it, but it's sort of this ramp up. If you've listened to the last few podcasts, we're ramping up to this peak feeding period that I love to call fall. It's way too short. It's not going to last long. So you guys got to get out there and enjoy it. So good luck to everybody. Hopefully you can enjoy the temperatures over the next few weeks. You can get out, check your own deer stands, maybe do a little grouse hunting. Don't put the boat away and launch the boat. I know I've been seeing a lot of people pulling their docks. The speedboats are going off. The ramps have been full of jet skiers and people pulling their machines. So now is the time for fishermen. This is when we bask in the glory of getting out there and not having to deal with any recreational boating. It's only fishing and only the hardcore anglers as we get towards October. But don't put that boat away. Like I said, the best time of year is upon us. So good luck to everybody. Until next week, I'm Tony Roach, and this has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast.